And we are live here. I'm here with Del Merritt, and we're going to talk about his story in Lifeblood 2, and probably some other things about vampires, and who knows where the conversation will go. Last time we wound up talking about Hawkwind and all kinds of things. So, how you doing, Del?
Hanging in there yourself.
I'm doing the same.
All
Doing the
right.
same. So let's talk about your story in here.
Okay.
What?
Um. You got a question, or you want me to
You
just?
do. Why don't you tell the viewers a little bit about it?
Okay. It's a vampire story where you don't really see much of the vampire. You don't get any scenes where they're creeping around doing anything bloody or anything like that. Um. It's all sort of told from the perspective of a family friend of the vampire's victim, if you want to call him a victim. There's a bit of a twist ending. I think you'd probably be able to see a little bit as you're going through. Um, and it's called the murder of convenience, and that's sort of what it is. There's a murder of convenience that happens, and I think that's really all I can say.
Convenient for a number of people, actually,
Yeah, yeah.
for different reasons.
And but the thing is that one of them that it was convenient for thought they were getting away with something. It turned out that no, you're not getting away with something.
Yeah,
Somebody would
yeah,
like to be.
yeah. It's a pretty cool story. Actually,
Thank you.
I like that one quite a bit. How'd you come up with the idea?
You know what? In all honesty, I can't remember. That that one's pretty old. I I don't even really remember writing it. I know that it didn't take very long. Um, I I generally kind of like flash write, like I just go and go and go. The only thing that takes, if a story, if it takes me a long time to write a story, it's because it's a long story. Either that or I'm interrupted and I can't actually, write for some reason. But that one, I seem to think that I had done the bulk of it in a day, and I think it's at least 10 years old, and yeah, I don't remember the impetus though. We had discussed inspirations before. I think the last time we talked, and for me, what it probably was that I had been watching a vampire film or reading a vampire book or something like that, and just seeing a person wasting away in the bed probably is what did it. And then the thing about it is that I can kind of regurgitate the same ideas all the time. So if I watch the same movie, the same thought might come to my head, and I'll go, "Oh, I should write a story about that," and then I'll be like, "Oh, wait, I did that like 10 years ago." So yeah, that I really wish I could remember more about how or why I wrote it. But yeah, just the angle seemed interesting to me. Um, that it wasn't a typical like here's this the victim is the hero, the person you're paying attention to in the story necessarily, um, or you're following around the exploits of this creepy vampire or something. Um, in fact, you in this story you see and know nothing about the vampire at all, and uh, that's rare for me. I usually give a little bit more detail about things.
Yeah, and
So yeah, I don't really remember why I wrote that.
the focus really isn't on the victim either. Uh,
No,
the
um,
focus is on two other characters, which without giving it away. Yeah,
yeah, I don't think it's giving anything away to explain that there's a family doctor, and as far as I was concerned, it was basically being told from her point of view, like she was the hero, if you will, or the center character, and she's friends with this family or couple, and the wife is ailing and refuses to go to the hospital to get treatment, and the husband is seemingly doing everything that he can to help her, and the doctor is getting into this as deep as she can, but has a hard time um, getting the wife to see things rationally. Um, the wife is insisting that if she stays home, where she can be surrounded by rosaries and crucifixes and garlic and stuff, she'll be fine. But the doctor is just saying, look, that's irrational. You need to go to the hospital. But the lady of the couple just won't do it. And it turns out in the end that there's a very good reason for everybody's motives, I guess you could say.
Yeah, there definitely is.
Yeah.
So, you were talking about, what maybe you were watching a vampire movie or something. Why don't you talk a little bit about some of the vampire movies that you really like?
Okay. Um, I think some of my go-to vampire films would always be Hammer films. Um, Not just the Christopher Lee ones; those are always fun. I know he 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 liked the very beginning, but after a while, as the series was going on, he became very disillusioned with the character and the way they wanted it portrayed. So by the time he was almost done, he had literally hated doing it. I think, and I think it probably shows a lot because he's in the movies less and less, and the movies become sort of goofy after a while, kind of like Godzilla movies, you know. Um, but just Christopher Lee as Dracula and the atmosphere that Hammer has, sets up for their gothic tales is just amazing, and it always sort of captured me when I was younger, and it still kind of does. But the ones that probably interest me the most aren't necessarily the actual Dracula films as much as some of the sort of offshoots, like they did. There was a Hammer film called Captain Kronos, Vampire Hunter. And when we were talking with Calvin, I think I had listed that as one of my favorite horror films. And it's funny because it's a horror film, but it's also an action film. And I think it's very much in the vein of Solomon Kane by Robert Howard. And again, it's got that great Hammer atmosphere to it, and probably more so than any other vampire movie I've seen, it encompassed a lot of actual folklore, like European folklore, about vampires and stuff. And some of it is very silly. And you're watching these guys who are like sword fighting these bad guys, and eventually sword fighting with a vampire and stuff. And the vampire that's killing in a really overly sexual way, more so than Dracula ever did. But also in a very unique way. There's not a lot of blood involved. But then at the same time, the hero's companion, who is like this older guy who knows all the folklore, is burying dead toads, saying that according to folklore, if a vampire goes over this toad, it's going to come back to life, and then lo and behold, it turns out to be true. And it's like that's a really goofy thing to put in a horror movie, that especially when you have that much action and stuff going on. But to me, I thought that was the most interesting thing about it, was that the way they did those kind of things. And again, there's a scene where they talk about how um, all the vampires that you meet are different. There's different species of vampires, and for a film from the early '70s, that's a pretty unusual idea. In books and writing, you find that idea all the time, but in film, not so much until later. And so there's actually a great scene where they're trying to figure out what it is that kills this particular type of vampire, and they actually discover by accident. And it turns out to be very fortuitous to them because it has to do with the material of the weapon of choice of the hero. So, um, it's actually a very fun movie. I don't want to give it entirely away, but if anybody feels like watching it, I think you probably find it on YouTube. If not, you can definitely get it off of Amazon or someplace like that. Other vampire films. mm, I really am partial to the Frank Langella version of Dracula. It strays very far from the book. All of them do. I mean, and the more they say we're following the book exactly, the further they seem to actually be from the book, or it just ends up being a bad movie altogether. Um, but the Frank Langella one is great because in a time when filmmakers were exploring the idea of a vampire being more of a disgusting Nosferatu-like creature, um, these guys made a film version of the play that had still been running forever, um, whose artwork was done by the sets were done by Edward Gorey, which is just amazing. Um, but unfortunately, they didn't do that in the movie. But so they followed the traditional sort of Dracula romantic vampire thing, where he's this very dashing, erudite European count. And although that, again, that's a very goofy idea, it's still a good movie. And Frank Langella is great, and the rest of the cast is great. Donald Pleasance and Kate Nelligan, and you get a very early glimpse of Sylvester McCoy in there as one of the asylum workers, and he's pretty funny in that. So yeah, that's one of my favorite Dracula films. Um, the one with Jack Palance is pretty good too. It's got this scene where he's actually talking about, um, what it was like to be Vlad the Impaler and to fight against the waves and waves of Turks. And you don't get, or at least not too often, scenes in Dracula movies where they go into that sort of thing. Um, Jack Palance is usually pretty good in almost everything. Anyway. he made a terrible Long John Silver, but that wasn't his fault.
I didn't like it in Batman.
What Batman was?
He was in the Tim Burton one. He was Jack Napier's boss.
I might have seen that. I'm not like a superhero fan, so but I don't remember him in that. So that was a long time ago too.
Yeah, that was a long time ago.
Yeah. It's funny because if you're anything like me, you probably still refer to it as like the new Batman.
No, I think of the Christian Bale ones as that, but
okay.
Yeah,
I didn't even know there was Christian Bale.
Oh well, those are really good films.
Okay,
awesome movies, but
so we're talking 90s or 2000s.
90s, yeah, much grittier, much more violent, and they're good movies though.
Okay, well that's always fun.
Yeah,
grit and violence is always fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Some things are just kind of always on your mind, and grit and violence for me are two of them.
For me, of the three that he did, I think the second one's the best, but mainly because Heath Ledger was so good as the Joker, just amazing.
Okay.
But,
I remember seeing scenes of him being the Joker.
Yeah, and he was just amazing. But yeah, those movies I think are really good.
Okay.
But so again, we get off topic.
Well, I think a lot of
last time it's all on topic.
Yeah, you learn more by talking about stuff that you're not talking about.
Right.
Talking about what you are talking about.
Right. Exactly. So, any other vampire movies come to mind?
I can't think of any right off. I mean, I got tons of them, and I watch tons of them. I think the ones I would like the best would probably be the ones I watch all the time. I have sort of this routine of cycling through films, and it's sort of seasonal. Like, a lot of certain horror films I can watch all year round. Certain horror films I'm happiest watching them around Halloween. As soon as it starts getting a little chillier out, and the leaves start getting crinkly, then there's certain horror movies that I want to see around that time. So yeah, I if I think of the ones that I cycle through, I'm having a hard time. Considering I probably watch them every year, I'm having a hard time thinking of them. Although I'm seeing right here, behind the computer, is part of my DVD collection, and I'm seeing Twins of Evil, another Hammer film, which was the Collinson twins, who were Playboy, featured in Playboy, and that's probably the, for lack of a better term, the sexiest or raunchiest of the Hammer films, because I think they use those girls' willingness to get nude a lot in that film. That one, and the other one is Lust for a Vampire, which is another great one, another Hammer film. And oh geez, just see lots of things, and yeah, it's hard to even remember which ones are vampire films after a while.
So, what about in fiction? Do you have any favorite vampire fiction?
I think that would be real patchy. Obviously, I really enjoyed Dracula when I was a kid, and I remember reading it and going. The first thing I said was like, "This is nothing like the movies." What are people doing when they're making these movies? And the fact that it's done all in correspondence was really intriguing to me. I thought that was one of the coolest things. Um, and I've included that in some of my stories. Now that we're in the age of texting and stuff like that, um, I have several stories where there's just little bits where people are texting back and forth, and then it gets back to the narrative like normal. And I was showing my, my wife some of the text bits, and she thought it was really clever and funny. Yeah, mostly I use it for comedy effect. Um, but I do have another vampire story that involves texting, and basically someone is texting this young girl who's in her apartment or her home, and he's texting like a stalker. Would I know where you are. I'm coming to get you. All these texts keep coming, and so she gets up and tries to you know barricade the rooms and make sure that this person can't get in and stuff. But eventually they do, and then that's when it all it all gets revealed, and the vampire comes out and fangs her flesh, and then um, so yeah. As far as other literary vampires, I mean, wow. Um, Le Fanu's vampire was a good one when I was a kid. I read that and I really liked that. Um, and then there's just patchy little bits here and there, like and I can't even think of anything right now. I know Lovecraft had that one that people consider a vampire story. Um,
Which
the
one's that?
the Shunned House,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
where the sort of moss that grows in the basement, which I know all too well about, it is apparently some sort of entity that is draining energy or something from people. And I never really thought of it as a vampire story, but a lot of people do. So um,
I thought of it as sort of Lovecraft's attempt at sort of deconstructing a gothic tale.
yeah, yep. I think you're right on point with that. Yeah, because he's doing all the same things, but he's doing it his way, which is it's not going to be the right thing. It's not going to be whatever you expect it to be. It's going to be out there. and
Right.
and again, that's what's so great about the different takes on different types of creatures. If that was to be considered a vampire, you know, there's so many different ideas about how these things should be, and I think that's great. Um, I haven't read most of the modern stuff. I don't read a lot of modern stuff, but I've heard a lot of stories about uh, the teenage vampires that sparkle. Um,
Twilight.
Twilight, yeah, and again, it's one of those things like that's not what I would choose to do, um, but whoever the author was thought that she was going to take it to this different level to make it so these romance novels for teens, and it seemed to work.
She made
um,
tons of money.
she made a lot of money, and it is a different take on things, and that any take on something other than just the following the regular rules, I always find at least interesting enough to say, oh, I'm glad that it exists.
Yeah, I mean, it's
Beyond that, I can't say.
interesting when somebody thinks outside of the proverbial box and
Yeah,
comes up with a different take on it.
definitely.
Rather than just regurgitating what everybody else has done over and over.
Yeah, and it's funny when you're writing. A lot of times you find yourself falling into that trap, or at least I do. Anyway, um, I'll be writing something, and I don't really recognize that I'm not describing um, a situation or the setting as well as I should be, because I take it almost for granted that it's just known, because it's something that's so typical. So a quick for instance would be if somebody is in a sort of fantasy Conan the Barbarian type world, um, I don't bother describing that world sometimes, and I forget to do that. And I, like I said, just take it for granted that people understand that, okay, this is Dungeons and Dragons. Like everywhere you go, you're going to find monsters and humans, and they're all going to get together and hang out and fight and whatever that kind of thing is. And it it's mostly because I've fallen into that trap, and I think that just that thing is so well understood that I don't need to go and
I
describe it
don't,
any better.
I don't think I'd call that a trap. I think that certain things are sort of like they're shorthand almost, and they're part of our subconscious cultural understanding,
Yeah,
and so you don't really need to describe it. But what you need to do is show how your case is different.
Yeah.
things that they're different in yours. I tend to be very much a minimalist writer myself,
Yeah.
and so I figure if you don't need to spend words and space and the reader's time describing something because it really isn't important to the story, you don't do it because
Yeah.
it's wasting everybody's time, I think.
I agree. And the thing for me that's a problem is what I focus on may not be something that will push the story forward. I might decide that I need to really, really describe this rock, even though this rock is just something that's being thrown at a guy or something. Um, but for me, part of what inspires that, probably what's happening is part of what's inspiring that particular scene that I'm going to describe so in such detail is my fascination with that that rock or that particular instance where, like, something is done in such a specific way. And a lot of times it does, I think for me, it does bog down the narrative a bit, where I could be describing things a little bit better somewhere else. But again, I just kind of go, oh, that doesn't matter. The important thing is this rock. And of course, I get uh, hung up on those things when it comes to certain things. Sex scenes quite often end up being very long and very detailed. Um, uh, the way someone is being killed might be very long, very detailed. Um, Sometimes what people wear, and I had, it's funny because I think I got that entirely from Michael Moorcock, because although to me what someone is wearing in a scene might be a very important thing because of what they're wearing, it may not have anything to do with the story, but because I envisioned it that way, I've got to describe it. And the only other guy that I've ever seen who would do that is Michael Moorcock, or at least the only guy that I've read. Um, where he'll say, like, this character got up that morning and put on his rust-colored breeches, and and then strapped on this thing that had 14 buttons, and really bizarre. Like, why are you telling me this? Or we know the guy's a fop. Who cares? But I tend to do the same thing when I envision that ensemble being important to my image. Um, and again, it may or may not push the story forward, but I suppose I'm at least saying something about the character, maybe.
Well, and sometimes, I mean, I do understand why sometimes people put things like that in the stories because by adding details like that, you can help someone to better feel like they're part of it and they're really
Yeah,
there. It sort of adds a layer of reality to it, I think.
yeah,
On the other hand, I also think that sometimes the readers are going to get a picture in their head anyway, and that
yeah,
picture is going to kind of be individualistic and sort of that's kind of one of the beautiful things about a book is it's not the same experience for any two people.
no, no,
You're going to read a book and you're going to picture one thing, and I'm going to read the same thing and come up with a completely different picture.
absolutely. Um, and it's funny because I think that the more I try to make that not happen, um, I probably end up not succeeding anyway, because you can't stop people's imaginations.
Right.
Um, and they've got go-to images that they're going to start from that you didn't. You're not starting from the same place. So, for instance, when I envision a character, um, if it's a throwaway character, it's just basically like brown hair, tall, dead. um, but if it's a character that has any importance, basically I'm envisioning their entire being, and I know who their face and stuff like that, and a lot of times they're based on either, let's say, celebrities or actors, or even people that I know. I mean, people that I know end up in my stories all the time. Sometimes I'll tell them about it and say, "Hey, you were a hero in a story of mine." Then sometimes I'll be like, "Hey, you died in a story of mine." But then other times I won't mention it all because they do not want to know what happened with that other character. Um, but yeah, so if I'm basing a character on a specific person, like their visual, just their appearance, I try to describe that person as much as I can, so that maybe they'll get the reader would get the same idea in their brain and go, "Wow, it's almost like they're saying that this redhead is Julianne Moore or something." But I know that just won't work. It just can't, because even the words you use to describe things don't necessarily um, create those images for people.
No, and
So
even you look at something like, okay, everybody knows what red is. Well, yeah, they do. But when you say red, you'll see one shade. I'll see a different one in my head.
yep,
The odds are you're not going to have the same shade in your thought as I am. You know.
absolutely not. Yeah, and you look at something as, like a red head, somebody with red hair. Red hair comes in so many different shades, and textures and designs and shininess and stuff. So again, you may think that you're limiting it by saying, well, it's red hair. Well, there's a lot of different red hair, So you're not. You're just trying to build the best frame you can, but you know that people are going to put the clay on as they see fit in their brains.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of, in some ways, that's why books for readers, books sort of have more of a life in your head than a movie will ever will,
Yeah,
because so much of it is personalized in your mind.
yeah. And I think that's one of the things people forget about movies. They think that, okay, the movie is the definitive version of a story, and unless that movie was written and created by one specific person who is also filming it and deciding who the cast is going to be and everything in it, that's not what it is. And so when you make an adaptation of Moby Dick, you're you're giving your version of it, your vision of what's happening there, and um, that there's no such thing as right or wrong. It's just whether people like it or not, and whether you like it or not. If you complete your film and you go, "That's what I was trying to say," well, that's all that matters. And if you look at somebody like John Huston, who creates a version of Moby Dick and has Ray Bradbury do the screenplay, and you get some top actors in there like Gregory Peck and stuff like that, it can end up being like the definitive version of that story. It might take over, and you might read the book and always think back to that movie, because it's a movie like that is so iconic. Um, but even that, I like to see different versions of these kind of stories, like Moby Dick. There's never been another good Moby Dick movie, unfortunately, but I do like watching the one with the guy from Star Trek, the bald guy.
Patrick Stewart.
Yes, the one with Patrick Stewart is actually really good. It's got some great stuff in it, but overall, it doesn't really match my image of the book. But Patrick Stewart is amazing, and
Oh,
some of the
he's such a good actor.
yeah, I mean, you could put that dude in anything, and he'd be like, "Oh, I got this. I've got this, girlfriend." He'd be all over it.
Yeah,
First time I saw
he-
him, I think was either, God, it would have been Excalibur or the movie Life Force, the sci-fi vampire thing, which I love that movie actually. He's in there for a very small portion, and he gets to have an on-scene kiss with Steve Railsback, and that's not something anybody wants, really.
yeah. I didn't. The first thing I ever remember seeing him in was Star Trek: The Next Generation. But
Oh, okay.
I mean, I'm sure I probably saw him in other things, but it's one of those things you see somebody in something, and if you don't have any frame of reference for them, and if it's a small enough part, you don't even remember they're in it, and then you wind up seeing them in something else that winds up resonating with you, and then you go back and see the other thing and go, I didn't know he was in that.
Yeah, and you find out that the guy's been acting for 40 years, and
Yeah.
you may have seen him a dozen times, but it just didn't click with you.
Yeah.
A certain character clicks with you. Um, my brothers and I had a experience like that with Oliver Reed. We had seen Oliver Reed in probably 30 different movies growing up, but for some reason, his character in The Shuttered Room, which has like Carol Lindley and Gig Young in it, um, and is vaguely based on a Lovecraft and August Derleth story. It's an okay film, but his character is just a typical asshole. But the weird thing is that at the time, Mel Gibson and like the Road Warrior movies were becoming pretty popular when we saw Shuttered Room for the first time. And so the first thing we thought was, look at this guy. He looks like a bogus Mel Gibson. because the way they had his hair done, and he's wearing like this little leather jacket or a little denim jacket and stuff. And so that was kind of the running joke for the movie, was that he was the bogus Mel Gibson. Oh, bogus Mel Gibson's going to go do this. Bogus Mel Gibson's going to do that. And it wasn't because we thought anything great about Mel Gibson, or that he was in any way better or more important than Oliver Reed or anything like that. It just was, that was the image that clicked in all three of our brains. And so pretty much even to this day, we'll make a bogus Mel Gibson joke about that movie.
That's funny.
Yeah, and yeah, like I said, we've seen him in 100 movies before that. It's just, that's the one that clicked on it. And then somebody will say, well, who was in that movie? Bogus Mel Gibson.
I may have to start using that.
Yeah. And, you know, it's a shame because both of those guys, very talented, but just what wankers. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
Oliver Reed was just a dick, and Mel Gibson's a bigger dick, and just a shame because so many good things that they did. You know, Oliver Reed probably throughout his entire career did great stuff. Mel Gibson, he lost it when he lost it, if you get what I mean. And like anything he did after that was just kind of like, dude, are you still here?
When was the last time you were relevant?
Yeah, right. I mean, probably the last movie that he did that was had any merit or anything to it whatsoever would have been Man Without a Face or something like that.
Something like that.
Yeah, because I didn't care for the cop movies. I like Danny Glover, but I just never got into him. There's some funny bits.
Weapon ones? You mean?
Yes, those. Yeah.
Oh my god, the first one is one of my movies that I'm like, okay, I can suspend disbelief, but there are so many issues with that movie that it's like, okay, one of them being there's a big police line, right? They've got this whole police, the area closed off. Danny Glover, without a uniform, nothing, he just walks up carrying an automatic weapon, and they tell him he can't walk through the line. So obviously they don't think he's a cop. Aren't they saying something about the automatic weapon he's carrying?
Right, yeah. And you can't tell me that all those cops recognized him. You
No,
know, like,
none of them did. Obviously, they weren't going to let him through the line.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, but no, but okay, by the way, take that weapon somewhere else, please.
Yeah.
We've got a situation we don't need you here.
Oh, there's another situation where there's a traffic jam, and they're out of the cars shooting at each other amongst this traffic jam. You don't see a single person in any of those cars trying to move their car out of there to get out of the way, ducking down, nothing. They're like machine gun fire going off everywhere, and these people are just like, doo-doo-doo-doo-doo.
Just turn up their radios.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, again, I remember so little about those movies. I know I saw the first one, and I think I saw the second one, if not most of it. I just remember that there was the funny part where Danny Glover's daughter had been in a movie or a commercial, a TV commercial, because she was trying to be an actor, and it turned out to be for condoms. And so they're all sitting there watching it, and Danny Glover's losing his mind, and Mel Gibson's trying to calm him down, and he's like, "No, man, you don't understand. You don't know cops. I'm gonna hear about this for the rest of my life." And like, I think he went into the work the next day, and there were like condoms in his locker and stuff like that.
That's funny.
So really, that's kind of the only thing I remember from any of this film. Probably because the daughter was cute. That's probably all I remember. But yeah, so yeah, it was around that time that I was just kind of like, this guy's not doing anything of any value anymore. And then a couple years later, he started acting goofy, and now you got what you got,
Yeah, you got some of those. There are some really, really good actors who just kind of go completely off the rails, and it's like you can never, even though you can appreciate their performances in the movies that they were in before that, you can sort of, I don't know, I can't anyway, ever kind of appreciate it the same way, because it always reminds me of what kind of a jackass they are.
Yeah. For me, a guy would have to be pretty incredible for me to just kind of go, okay, this guy's a good artist, but he's just an asshole, in order for me to keep watching those things with at least with the same enthusiasm. Oliver Reed comes close for me for that, because again, like I said, he's in a lot of some of my favorite movies. A great one being Curse of the Werewolf, the Hammer film, where he plays the werewolf. And but the thing is, you fall in love with these actors' performances, and you don't know how they are in real life. You have to try to separate it as best you can, but sometimes you just can't. It just leaves a bad taste in your mouth, and you just can't. So, like, knowing that Oliver Reed was just like completely insane and had little or no respect for women whatsoever, um, it's kind of hard to continue watching the movies that I grew up with him in it. Um, but that one I can kind of do. The one that's a little harder for me is Cosby, because
Oh yeah.
that guy was I worshipped him when I was a kid. Um, my cousins had all the records, and we used to sit around and listen to him, and we watched movies and stuff like that. And I literally can't even watch or listen to those old routines anymore.
No, I
Um,
don't either. All I can think about are those poor women.
yeah, yeah. It's just it's yeah. That to me is one of the biggest ones. It hurts the most, because I always thought I always looked at Bill Cosby as somebody who was sort of a force for good.
Right.
In all of his works, he seemed to be that way. When we were kids growing up watching the Fat Albert show, we heard he was making a cartoon. It was like Bill Cosby was having a cartoon that's going to be amazing. So we watched it, and to us, it was really important because it was a great show. But the other thing was that there was never a point where we sat there watching that cartoon going, "Oh, is this how it is for those people?" We always just sat there going, "Oh, this situation, we know what this is like." And I think for tons and tons of kids, it was basically showing everybody that everybody goes through the same shit. If you don't, it's because you're too rich, or you live in a situation like where there's war or something. But basically, we're all going through the same kind of stuff, and you know, to us, Fat Albert was one of those great things. And you look at a lot of stuff that he did for kids, and to me, I thought it was great because it was sort of bridging some gaps and stuff. But then you find out that, and you're just kind of like, well, that's all blown.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a good show.
Yeah. And I think it kind of started emerging during the Cosby Show years, when people started talking about him being a little weird about certain things and stuff. And so that was when my interest kind of fell off. But then it just totally disappeared once they were just kind of like, yeah.
Yeah, and
He's been doing this thing.
and it's important to note that some people might say, "Well, but he got let go. His conviction was overturned." His conviction was overturned because the DA broke the deal that they gave him.
Yeah.
It wasn't because he wasn't guilty.
Yeah.
So
are we supposed
the evidence that they used was obtained in an illegal manner, but it was still real evidence.
Yes. Yeah. If you see somebody shoot somebody in the face, but they can't prove it in court of law, am I supposed to just say, well, I guess I didn't really see that then?
Yeah.
It's that simple. I mean, things are what they are. The law, it does what it the best it can to try to make these things, all visible so that justice can be done. We would hope, anyway. And it very rarely can do that, because it does require a lot of evidence to get things done. Then again, in other situations, all you got to do is say it was that guy, and then the next thing you know, he's in the death chair. So.
Oh yeah, I mean, but and to me, I would much rather some guilty people get off without being punished than have innocent people getting punished for things they didn't do.
Absolutely. I mean,
if you've got to err on one side, that's the side to err on.
That's the side you want to err on, yeah, because chances are they're gonna get caught again. I don't believe in fate or karma or any of that bullshit. But the thing is that very few people that do horrible things to people only do it just once.
Right.
They're likely going to end up in that same situation and make that same stupid mistake again.
Although in the case of Cosby, I don't see that happening now. But
I mean, he's already up again. They've already brought more charges again.
Right, in civil court. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. Well, again, he's probably too old to do this.
Exactly. I mean, the guy's in really, really bad condition. Yeah. I don't imagine he's doing any of that anymore.
No. And then again, you wonder, it's not for me to say what the correct amount or type of justice would be to because of such crimes, I think only the victims could say
Oh
something.
yeah,
But at the same time, it's like his life is pretty ruined. I mean, he went from being this iconic dude that the entire country kind of loved to being someone that now, at best, is just being joked about. He just trying to stay out of court here and there and stuff has probably pretty much close to bankrupt him. And I don't think anybody's going to hire him to do anything, and nobody's going out and buying his DVDs or anything. So the only people who would probably be doing that would be, rapists who thought he should get away with what he did.
yeah.
And I don't even see that happening.
Except
So
he's still got defenders, like Felicia Rashad is still defending him.
right, because it's hard to believe, that somebody that you're good friends with would do something like that if you don't see that side of them, and you end up coming up with excuses for every instance. So like when the first 20 women come out and say it, you go, well, they were all high.
Yeah,
Okay. Then the next 20 come out and you say, yeah, but they're all liars. You can't trust. But after a while, it's like, okay, now it doesn't make any sense anymore. You're definitely arguing on the wrong side there, and it's good to stand up for people that you care about, but at the same time, you can't be denying the truth about things, especially if people have been hurt. It's just not.
yeah. When you're talking about that, I remember a personal example of that was when I was a kid. Our paper boy was abducted and murdered, and our next door neighbor, when they wound up catching the guy who did it, our next door neighbor worked with him and was like, "There's no way, they've got the wrong guy. He's such a nice guy. He could never have done that." Well, guess what? He was convicted. He died in prison. He did do it.
Yeah, he did do it. But isn't that the cliche thing? That whenever there's a serial killer or something like that, he was such a nice guy, very quiet, kept to himself.
Yeah,
he was busy in the basement chopping up women.
Yeah, and this dude actually did some of the stereotypical things that people like that do. He was out because it was in the winter. He was out on his snowmobile looking for the kid, organizing search parties before they found the body. And it's like somebody's like, well, why? He was part of the search party. How would he have done it?
He's trying to place it as far away from him as possible.
Exactly.
Yeah, the overzealous guy should always be examined because everybody feels hurt by something that happens. The only people who should be that crazy about it are people who are either immediate family or really close friends. But when there's some guy in the neighborhood who's just, I'm gonna definitely prove that this is the thing, not saying that they need to be arrested and beaten or anything like that, but you definitely got to turn an eye to them.
Yeah, don't overlook them.
We should have learned that by now. It's happened way too many times.
Yeah.
How did we get onto this now?
I don't know. we have a funny way of getting into different things.
Yeah.
I didn't really have any other things I was going to ask you about. I don't know if you have any other things you wanted to chat about, but
not that I could think of. It's one of those things where when the situation comes up, we think of it and then it's like, oh yeah, that's But
exactly.
I kind of didn't come into this with a plan.
I usually don't.
No, I work from my seat of my pants all the time.
I'm like the doctor. I don't usually have a plan. I make it up as I go along.
Yeah. Well, that's a good subject or topic. How much someone plans of a story that they write. Do you find that it runs the gamut for you? It could be every detail before you put pen to paper, or you just have no idea but a kernel and you just start writing.
For me personally, it's more times than not I will have the beginning and the ending in my head when I start, and then a lot of times I do wind up before I actually start typing it out. I've had it in my head brewing for weeks, and so I have worked out a lot of the details, but then other things get thrown in there as I go along, and it all depends. I mean, there are other ones like I'm getting ready to put out a novella on September 4th, a horror novella, and that one started in a weird way because we've got this. I don't think you're part of that story variant group that we started.
No.
We got
it
this.
It sounded really cool, but I didn't think I would have time.
put this group together, and we came up with a bunch of criteria that you had to include in a story, and so we all started writing stories. Well, mine got so long, and I liked it so much that I decided to expand it into a novella, and I'm going to release it as a novella, and then I'm going to do the short story version of it in the collection we wind up doing. But literally, that started. The only thing I really knew, those were the only things I really knew were the criteria we had, which was like you had to have a non-binary person who's a writer as one of the characters. You had to have like a teacher, an older teacher, as one of the characters. There had to be some kind of a book of forgotten knowledge or something, and it had to have a forest in it, and it had to end in a graveyard. And those were the only facts I had, and so I just started building from there. And
no, that's great though. I mean, that ticks all the boxes for me. I mean,
yeah,
like that's all my stuff is all like that. You know,
I think it's a fun little story. It's kind of weird because the writer actually is narrating the whole thing, and I'm still not used to the non-binary things. Not that I don't try, I just forget.
no, it's just we're old. It's hard to catch
and
up.
they wind up kind of going sort of around. It's not a real direct, straight lines told story, but it's and they are very snarky, and so there's a lot of snark in it. It's a fun one, I think.
Oh, it's cool. Yeah. I would have liked to have been involved in that, but I can't commit to anything right now.
Yeah, I was going to say there's literally only 2 people have them done. So if you wanted to join, you could still join.
Yeah, I'd like to, but
yeah,
everything's moving so quick right now with everything, so it's hard. It's hard for me to focus, you know.
So how do you do it? Are you just seat of the pants guy too?
For me, it runs the gamut. There are stories and songs even that I'll go. I'll just get an idea, and it will just all come to me, just almost with the exception of little details. The whole thing just comes, and so I just go to the computer and start going. And then there's ones where all I've got is a kernel of an idea. Like what if this skull, was the skull of somebody famous, and it was found in my basement, or so, and then I just go. And with anything like that, in the old days that would suck because you'd sit there and you'd get hand cramps writing down something that was going to just lead nowhere. But nowadays, well, you just delete it all and start over again. You don't even have to get rid of the parts you didn't, that didn't work. You just get rid of the parts that didn't work. Rather, keep the stuff that is good. And there may be times when you're just like, no, I can't salvage this. I can't make anything out of this. And then there's other times where you just put it aside and go, I'm going to revisit this. And in fact, I just finished the story a couple weeks ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. And it turned out to be, I think, the longest story that I've ever written. And it could be a book on its own. And I didn't intend for it to be that way. But what I did do was end up throwing in a bunch of things that I had already thought of and tried to do something with. So there was something that I written 2 or 3 years ago that was just, again, it was an idea, and it had to do with vampires again. And I had maybe a page or 2 of this plot written down. And so I just took that and put that in there because this character was going to be going on many different journeys and hitting all these different ideas and meeting all these different people and stuff. It has a forest. It doesn't have a graveyard, but it has a book. I don't think there was a teacher, but there were certainly teacher-like people. And then I ended up putting a couple other things in there too, because I was like, oh, this is, clearly she's leading off to this thing. And it was like, this is what needs to happen now. I've already written that, but I had never finished it. Put that in it. And then, once I put all the bulk of it together, around it all, it's just ended up being like, this huge story. And I suppose I'll have to break it down into 2 or 3 sections or something. Either that or just put it out on its own as a book on its own, because it's just ridiculously long. And it doesn't need to be. I don't think that's what I value my wife doing the editing, is that she'll come in and just be kind of like, what is this? And I'll be like, I was drunk. Right, we'll just take that all out. She's and she does it even before we get to the editing. A lot of times I'll be telling her something from a story, and she'll just be kind of like, "Yeah, that's really dull," or something like that. And I'll be like, "Is it okay? Well, I'll go back and take that out." She has a lot more grounded vision of things than I do.
Well, it's kind of good to have the two sides there.
It is, and everybody should always bounce their stuff off of other people. Um, it doesn't mean you have to take every criticism. It doesn't mean you have to take the criticism badly, first of all. But it also doesn't mean that you have to take every bit of advice either.
Right.
But you definitely should weigh it and think about what people are saying. Don't be afraid of that. To me, I always think of that. And sometimes people give you good ideas. And my wife will do that all the time. She'll be talking about something or other, and I was like, I'm going to write a story about that. She was like, fine, go ahead.
Yeah, you get weird ideas sometimes for stories. They just come out of nowhere.
Yeah, the dumbest thing. I mean, one of the first stories that I wrote when I started writing in earnest, because I guess I always wrote when I was a kid. I used to write a lot, and I wrote a story that got entered into some sort of scholastic contest when I was in grade school, and my teacher just flipped out over it. He thought it was just incredible, and he was not only amazed at the story itself, but that I was so interested in folklore, because it ended up being about a creature from Scottish folklore.
Oh, nice.
And so he was just kind of like, this is like college level stuff, So he entered into some sort of contest and it won. And the suck part was because it was on paper, I never got it back.
Oh, geez.
That happened to me twice, because a couple years later, when I was in high school, we were doing an art project, and I drew the back cover of the Heaven and Hell album by Black Sabbath, right? And everybody thought it was great. And so my art teacher saw that, and she was like, I would like to enter this into the contest. And, they had out in the lobby of the school, they set up all the big boards that you could tack things on, and people came through going, oh yes, that's very nice, like they were at some sort of art show, and I never got it back. I was pissed. So digital things are a lot better in that way, because you get to keep a copy and send as many copies out as you want. But so yeah, I kind of stopped writing a lot in my young adult years, when I was in my 20s, let's say. It wasn't until my 30s or so that I started writing again, and it was very sporadic. And one thing that I wrote was just inspired by a tree that we drove past every day coming back from work. And one day that tree was gone. And so the joke I made to my wife was like, nope, that tree's gone. It just was like, fuck it, I'm out of here. Like, just uprooted and went away, And so the thing came to my brain. I was like, what if that was like really a thing? And so it was great. And one time I was out doing yard. I think I told this one to you, that I was out doing yard work and heard a noise up on the roof of my house. And old houses just have a tendency to, people just kept building onto them in sometimes in very illogical ways, so that there's many roofs and gables and things. And I dawned on me that for the first time that there were parts of my roof that I could never see. No matter where I stood, out in the street, in the alley, in my backyard, no matter what, I couldn't see them. If I got up to my neighbor's house and looked out their windows, I might be able to see them. But other than that, it's a mystery up there. And, some places you can get to, some places you can't. So I came up with a story just like that. And so when I wrote it, it had to do with the fact that what if something happened up there and just no one knew because you couldn't see up there? And, so that became another early story for me as well. And I think it's that easy to come up with things.
Yeah, I've got one that sometimes I come up with just really, really crazy random things will give me an idea for a story. I got one that's just been sort of brewing up here for a while now. I have the title and I know what it's going to be about, but I haven't got any of the details and I haven't started typing it out. But the whole thing came about because my wife typed in oil of Olay, and autocorrect changed it to Owl of OK. And so I came up with Owl of OK for the title. And I have a whole idea of what this story's going to be.
You just haven't gotten around to doing it yet.
No.
I don't know, but it sounds cool though. The Owl of OK.
Yeah. Well, that's like there's one I have called The Curse of Samantusin, which also came from one that my wife did when her Uncle Tom and Aunt Susan were visiting in town.
I remember
And he mentioned it and switched the letters, and it became Samantusin.
Yep.
And hey, that sounds Egyptian. I'm going to do a story called Curse of Samantusin.
I do that all the time with things that either I say or my wife say.
Yeah.
Where we mix up things. Before I started writing a lot, there was a thing I was doing on the internet. It was the Adventures of Fritz the Gnome, and I guess in a way you could say that it was writing. But what I was doing was, I had started collecting garden gnomes back in the '90s, and there was one that my mom gave me that just was like the coolest dude. In fact, here he is. This is Fritz, right?
Hey, Fritz.
There's people all over the world who know Fritz because this website that we had, basically we would take Fritz with us everywhere we went, and this ended up being a trend. There was a movie that came out. It was a French film, and I cannot Amelie it was called, and the very quirky girl in the story decided that she was going to try to convince her father that he needed to get out and travel. She stole his garden gnome and was taking it to photography shops and using a different backdrop and then sending postcards with the gnome saying, "Oh, I wish you were here." So once that movie came out, people started doing it, and I was already doing it. And so I was like, that movie stole from Fritz, right? Which it did not. Apparently people have been doing this forever. So we would not only take him to everything that we did, like if we were doing a gig, he sat on the floor. And so the pictures would come out. They go on the website and we'd write a little description. But then we also came up with the idea of making little stories and stuff. So, I'm carrying around, garden gnomes into the woods and setting them up in different ways, taking pictures and then writing captions on it. And, flushing out whole, sometimes 3-part stories that just go on between battles of elves and goblins and things that I would make out of felt because that was the cheapest, easiest way to make 50 goblins. And it ended up being way too much time to do. And my ideas got too big for, once you're carrying bags and bags of props down to the river so that you can do something, make these films and all, it just became too much of a problem. So what we did was we kind of stopped with that website, but we gave Fritz the Gnome his own Facebook page and did nothing with it until till COVID hit and the lockdowns. And a friend of ours was having a birthday, and the person he was going out with at the time wanted all of his friends to send in videos, saying happy birthday. And so my wife and I were like, we're not just going to say, "Oh, hi, happy birthday, Harley. I love you, miss you." We've got to do something. And so the night before his girlfriend needed all these videos to be done, we got home from work and I was like, wait, I think I got an idea. And that's what started what is now the modern Fritz the Gnome page. And Fritz doesn't appear in it a lot. He's sort of just the host name, if you will. So a lot of what, I don't even know why I got onto this. I think this is why I wasn't writing, because I was doing Fritz the Gnome for so long. But yeah, and then I started. I got down to writing again. Probably about 2000 was when I started doing it more in earnest. So in a lot of my books, I actually will have a thing on the title page that says when the stories were written, because they're so old, they're very dated now. Characters in some of my stories don't have cell phones because there were no cell phones. What's that?
They're period pieces.
Yeah, but they weren't meant to be. Is the problem? I wrote them and sat on them.
Contemporary at the time, but
yeah, I wrote them and sat on them for 20 years. So it's like, and because the Chronicles of the Black Queen is all one line. There's never really a point where one book says, 20 years later this happened. No, it's all a continuous thing. um, and so it would incorporate in very slight ways things that were happening at the time. So I distinctly remember when Hurricane Sandy hit the East Coast, and was tearing things up over here. um, that ended up being in one of the stories. And to anybody reading that story, 10 years from now or whatever, they're just going to be like, oh, it was a hurricane. But by me putting in there when these things were written and when they take place, um, you can draw the connection a little bit better. And there was a period I got into where I got with some political stuff, and I didn't like it. So I'll probably end up, if I ever get to publishing those books, that I'll probably erase that. But right now, it's very much a period piece when you have people in MAGA hats, attacking homeless people and stuff like that. Again, 20 years from now, people won't know what that means.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I can't remember the original point. I'm just babbling, really.
I don't remember where we were originally from on that either. But
I don't know. Yeah, I think I would. I know I can go back as far as I know why I was talking about the Fritz the Gnome website was because it was taking up all my time, and so I wasn't writing. But that wasn't where we started. That wasn't the point I was trying to make.
Oh,
But
no.
yeah, yeah. But that is one of the funny things about, because I write constantly. I mean, 2019, I keep a record of when everything I've written, and I write. Is it part of an ongoing series? Does it involve certain characters? How many words, and the date? And 2019 turned out to be weird, because I think I only wrote 5 stories for the entire year, and I remember just not writing a lot, and I was really miserable. But when you look at other years, it's just kind of like, 30 stories and stuff like that. And again, because I write constantly, almost every day at work. Um, you know, before the job that I have now, I would write when I was on my breaks. So it was 15 minutes here, 15 minutes there, and an hour for lunch or whatever, half hour, whatever, whichever job it was at the time. And the rest of the time I'm just writing in my head and then putting it onto the computer. The job I have now, I got a lot of downtime, so I get to write a lot more. But yeah, so because of that process, and my general fear of attempting to publish things, I ended up with, like I said before, like 40 books worth of stuff.
Wow.
And now I'm basically just putting them all together and trying to get them on. That's why in the course of 1 year, I've already got 3 books out, and hopefully I'll have 2 more this year. My wife is currently editing another one, and then maybe 2 or 3 this year if I'm lucky. But that's the main thing, is getting her to edit them, because I can go over it with a fine tooth comb. And first of all, I don't know what I'm looking for. And second, when I see it, I just so didn't you know that you spelled mother with an A? Nah, I just didn't see it. I looked at it 50 times and didn't see it. But she'll catch it right off. So yeah, it's very strange to do it that way. I don't know if any writers have done it that way. And it probably also comes from, like I said, there was a great fear of attempting to publish things. I sent in tons of places I'd sent stuff into, and if there wasn't just the regular rejection of you suck, there was a lot of limitations, which is, it's a good thing to know nowadays. When you're going into this, you go to these publishers and you go to their website, and it tells you right on the front page, or it'll have a page and it'll tell you how to go about doing this. Put your thing in this form. Just send us this much of it. We don't want the whole damn book. so on and so forth, to tell you where to send it. But also, it has a list of rules and regulations and things that it tells you we do not want this. One of the greatest ones I saw was on there. Somebody said, apparently they did a lot of fantasy books, and they said, do not write a book about your Dungeons and Dragons campaign and send it to us. They were like, that's not a story. That's right out. We're just not interested. So yeah, my stories a lot of times, I'd go to these websites and see the list of things you're not supposed to do, and I was just kind of like, oh, okay. So I, there were very few places that I could actually send these things, and the very few places that I did were just kind of like, we're not interested in anything like that now or ever. um, so for me, I just, like I said, I continued writing, but it became like, well, this is never getting published or anything. And then it was you. I think I've said it before. You were kind of the thing that started it all when you accepted that one story, and I found out about places like Lulu, and so yeah, I'm very much happy with that, and I thank you for that.
Oh, sure. Glad to be part of the process.
Yeah, I always try to pass that kind of thing on. Not only compliments to those that have inspired, but try to be a help to the other people and be like, no, dude, all you got to do is just send this thing into Lulu. You can do it yourself, Even if it's just crayon scrawl, just do it. You can do it, and maybe nobody will buy it, but is that why you're doing it? I mean,
Yeah, if you're doing it to sell and make lots of money, you're probably in the wrong business.
Yeah,
because it's very unpredictable.
Yeah, and people always think of artists, writers, visual artists, or musicians as being like, well, you become that thing, and then you just are rich doing that. And it's like, no. Think about how many people play guitar. Think about how many bands there are. Think about how many people write or paint. Very few of them do you ever hear about. The reality is that your average writer is generally working another job, but putting out books here and there when they can. And if they're lucky, at some point in their career, somebody will catch on with something and it'll get big. It's not going to be a J.K. Rowling story. You're not going to be like, sitting in the coffee shop typing up your book one day and sending it away and nobody cares, and then one guy makes the gamble on you and suddenly you're famous and rich. That's just not going to happen. It doesn't mean you shouldn't try for that, but don't get your hopes up. Don't quit your day job, as they say.
Yeah, don't do it for the money, because if you do it for the money, you're more likely to be disappointed than not. So
Yep.
You've got to do it for something other than the money.
Yeah, I was of all the different bands in that I've been in and different types of music that I've played. I was actually in a rock band that had the potential to be big, and this was the first and only band that I ever felt that with, and I knew it could have been a thing. And this was around the time when I think grunge was only just catching on. So at the time, we would have been a bit of an anomaly, but if we had stuck it out through the grunge era, we would have probably made it because we wouldn't have counted as grunge. And I thought we were a very good band. The thing was is that there were people in the band. There was someone in the band that I just couldn't stand. So I couldn't stand being with them, and I distinctly remember thinking, this is not the guy I'm going to get in a fist fight with to defend, or to defend somebody in a fist fight. If when he says something stupid on stage, I'm not pounding the shit out of somebody else to defend this guy because he's an asshole. So I was like, I'm done. But that could have been a band that could have done something. But where I'm happiest is playing what I want to play and having very few people care about it. What we do now with the Sea Dogs, the sea shanty stuff, we have a very strange career. I mean, it's a project. It's more of a hobby than anything. We don't make any money, but we do get to show up in the weirdest places. We played at the when they had a Tall Ship Festival here on the Delaware River, and on one side you got Philly, and on the other side you got Camden in New Jersey. Well, the tall ships were coming through there, and I can't remember what they called it, but they basically were having bands and entertainment going on either side of the river. And so we were signed up to do both sides. We were going to do Philly on one day and Camden on the other. And the Camden day, because it was rainy, there wasn't a lot of people out, so we didn't end up even using the stage or anything. We just wandered around and played. But the Philly day was the Sunday, and that was a beautiful day. And there were thousands and thousands of people. And we ended up being the first guys on stage, on this big outside stage on the river where you see Philly in the background, or rather you can see Camden in the background. Um, and, during our sound check, we just noticed all these people filling these bleachers. And for me, that was a throwback to my first gig when I was just a kid. So I was all right, but I looked at some of my other guys, and they were just kind of like looking at the bleachers filling up, getting like a little wigged out. And, the guy finally turns on the stuff and the power and everything. We're ready to go. And my one guy comes over to me and he looks at me and he goes, "I've never been on a stage before." I was like, "Just stay by me, buddy. You'll be all right." And he did stunningly. So it was great. So yeah, and then we do things like that. It's like, so we play at local history fairs where people come by and see us dressed as pirates and go, "Oh, these guys are amazing." But, we don't make any money. And then we'll play at something like that where we're in front of like 200 or 300 people. And then we had a weird instance over the winter. Are you familiar with the tradition of the Merry Lwyd that they have in Wales? It's one of the old hobby horse or hooded animal festivals that they would used to do in the old days. And they revived it in Wales. And the creature is called the Merry Lwyd. And it's basically a horse head. And you put a sheet over it so that you can hide under it and have the horse head on a stick. And the basic idea is a group of people lead this thing from one house to the other, a la Halloween trick-or-treating, and they start singing a song making fun of the people inside the house. And then the people inside the house have to sing back and make fun of them. And that keeps going on until nobody can think of anything else to say. And then they get let in to be given lots of alcohol. And they go, "Hey," and then they walk off and they go to the next house and do the same thing. And this goes on all night. Well, we've been using that with the Sea Shanty group in a bunch of different ways for a while. And we went into Philly around Christmas last year. And the guys that came up with the idea for us going into Philly, one of them was a Welsh guy who was over here with his boyfriend. And these two kids kind of promoted this thing. And so the next thing we know, we're getting written about in Welsh newspapers.
Nice.
And then it gets even better because we find out that the Welsh BBC wants to interview us about why the hell do people from New Jersey and Philadelphia have, this Merry Lwyd. And so, yeah, here I am, talking to, the interview was done through email, like the way you did with Strange Sound of Cthulhu. And the guy who wrote it, his first language was Welsh, so his English was not the best. But so when he actually wrote what we were writing, there was a lot of problems. He messed up a lot of things and stuff. But overall, he got the right thing down. And yeah, it was just so all of a sudden we just got rocketed to like worldwide fame for no reason because of this Welsh article. Because we decided that we were going to drag our horse head around with us.
That's crazy.
But that's more fun than anything else. I mean, yeah, I'd love to be paid millions of dollars for every show we do or something, and have that kind of celebrity. But that's just not going to happen. Just give me things like that. That's a lot of fun.
Yep, that's payoff in and of itself.
It is, and we meet a lot of great people, and that's fun, and we learn a lot of things. And there's times when you were a musician, so there's times when you're on stage and you just you finish something, or even when it's happening, you look over at the other guys and you just kind of like you realize that something's clicked so well, or just sounds so great,
And there's nothing, to me, there's nothing quite like that feeling, and because it's like you're creating it, but it also isn't just you creating it; it's all the other people. And everything just works together to create something way bigger than yourself. And
yeah, because it has a life of its own.
Yes, it's a magical thing. It really is.
Yeah, and we have those every once in a while. I'd say maybe once a year we get one of those that's like that. There's other times where it's just kind of like, damn, that was good. I didn't know we could do that, you know. But yeah, there's times, and then you finish and you're just kind of like, was that? Did that really?
Yeah,
And everybody's looking at each other, you know, and the audience is like, yeah, you know. So
yeah.
that's what,
Those moments are awesome.
yeah. And I think for me, that's the way it is with every type of art that I do, if you want to call it that. Um, when I write, I'm writing because you were saying that we get inspired by things that we see, and that's one form of inspiration. But another is like you write because of the way you feel about something, um, and I think that in everything that I write, as bizarre as it may seem, or horrific as it may seem, there is something that I'm saying. There's some part of me that is saying a thing. It's almost never just like, oh, isn't this cute? You know, um, I'm trying to express something somehow, and I don't know if people are ever going to get it. And if they do get it and they understand it differently, that's weird. It's like, oh well, this guy's like a monster. So, okay.
Well,
Um,
there are times I even like when I wrote the Homestead. Uh, there there were themes in that I didn't even realize were in it until I started thinking about it, getting ready for an interview, and I'm like,
yeah,
this book is really kind of a lot about family, and then I realized that it's more it's about family in that there's sort of a cohesive family there, and there's sort of an odd dysfunctional family with the other side of it, and yet it's a home invasion horror story.
right,
That's
yeah,
what the whole thing is. But it's like I didn't realize that these themes were there, but once I started thinking about it, I can literally see them there. I mean, I did know some of it was there because the one of the things that's like a family tradition for the one family is it's they say family takes care of family or something like that. It's like a phrase that they use a lot.
right,
So I did know it was there for that, but then I didn't realize that the guys breaking into the place almost represent a dysfunctional family unit
right.
until after I was thinking about it. It's just weird.
Huh. That's interesting. Yeah, and that's cool because I mean, writing is like that. It allows you to see things within you that you didn't necessarily recognize.
Right.
It's cathartic in a way. Um, and yeah, you not only will you find things in your story that you may not have known you were doing, maybe you did, you never, but you didn't think about it at the time. But other people are going to find things too, and I've had people read my stuff and come back with really weird. Well, they weren't weird. They're actually very like pedestrian um, things. Like this clearly means this, and it's like no, that's not what I meant. In the Chronicles of the Black Queen, the the three main characters end up being three sisters, and one has like white hair, one has red hair, and one has black hair. And I remember somebody saying, "Okay, well, clearly this is, you're just saying this is you and your brothers because before my hair went white, it was brown. My older brother's blonde, my little brother's red." And I was like, no, it's nothing like that. First of all, if you're going to look at it that simply, because red, brown, and black or blonde, um, they're in the wrong order, and the ages aren't right. My older brother's 6 years older than me. My older brother's a boomer. I got to be a Gen Xer, so, um, so no, that doesn't work. And then so people will find things whether you meant for them to be there at all. I once had a interesting discussion with someone who clearly was incapable of rational thought um, about Puff the Magic Dragon and the old theory that it's about smoking marijuana and stuff. And there came a point where they interviewed the guy that wrote it, and it was not Peter, Paul, and Mary or any of the other people that did it. And he was like, "Yeah, I don't know where people got that idea from, but it's really goofy because when I wrote that song, I had never even heard of marijuana. It was the early '50s, and I was the straightest kid you could imagine in your life." And he was like, "And I didn't get into it like that until I was in, till the 60s or 70s. And he's like, that was not my culture. So I don't know why people would think that. And so, this woman had said that, and I was like, actually, that's not true. The guy explained it. And she was like, yeah, yeah, but he's lying. And I was like, okay, whatever. So,
I without giving too much away and explaining who it is, I remember a few years ago, I was in a chat on Facebook, and they were talking about a certain song by a certain band, and all these theories about what the title to the song meant. I quite literally know the guy who wrote the song, and I had asked him at one point what the title was about,
right.
and he told me. So I put, what he said in there. No one believed it. They wanted to go on with their own little stories.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's better to believe the myth.
It's just funny. These people just, I don't know. I don't get it.
Yeah.
Some people aren't good at changing their opinion when presented with facts that disagree with it.
No, and because their opinion helps form part of a worldview, and
Yep.
so if that one thing is wrong, well then other things might be wrong, and then that whole House of Cards thing starts coming down, and you realize that your worldview is bullshit. Is the problem,
And,
you know?
and, and guess what? I don't know about you, but I've gone through that exact process at least a couple times in my life. And it is not fun. It is not pleasant,
No,
but you come out of it a lot better person because you're dealing with something that's real.
absolutely. The I'm not a believer in things like uh, witchcraft and tarot cards and stuff like that. But I did study those things a lot when I was young. And one of my favorite cards in the tarot deck was the Tower, because the meaning behind that card is exactly what you're talking about. It's meant to that you're tearing away the crap that you have built around you, thinking that this is the way the world is, and learning that it's not. And so people are always like, well, that's a very enigmatic card. It doesn't mean anything, but it is actually, it's got a pretty cool meaning to it. um, I don't know that I ever had too much of that, only in small snippets, because there was never a time. Most of that worldview stuff comes when you're pretty young. I think for the majority of people, if they get stuck in that way of thinking, it's because their parents thought that way and everybody they hung around with thought that way, and so it becomes mythological. You don't want to mess with those things. That'd be like, again, like finding out that your uncle who raised you was a pedophile.
Yeah.
You just don't want to believe it. Um, so yeah, if most of it's happening when you're young, the thing was is that I didn't have any. There was nothing around me that made me tried to make me think a certain way. So all of my beliefs were very scattered and open and didn't really make much sense or anything. They just fell in line as time went on, as I grew and learned about things. Um, I didn't have any real exposure to religion. My dad died when I was real young, and he was not religious. My mom was raised Catholic and hated it. So we never went to church. The only time I had ever seen the inside of a church was, I guess, the first time somebody died that we actually cared about, which were very few, believe it or not. So yeah, I didn't have any of that kind of stuff going on, and we did Christmas and everything, but it just didn't really mean anything. Um, to me, some of the earliest things that I remember forming my little Dell, as I was being a little guy. Um, like I said, my brother was 6 years older than me, so when he was learning to read, I was able to comprehend when he would read. So there were three books that we had that were just like almost like Bibles for us. One was a book, a little golden book called Sailor Dog, and it's just a story about a little dog that's he's a sailor. Ship gets wrecked, he gets another ship. It goes on and goes on because he was a sailor dog. That's what he did, and for some reason that resonated with us. Um, there was a version of the Snow Queen that we had back in the '60s. The Japanese used to make these crazy books with holograms in them, and the cover and the inside fold out were hologram pictures, and they were just so amazing looking that we were just enthralled by this, and it was much more of a picture book than a reading book. Um, but yeah, those two books, and then the other one was Beowulf. Um,
Jeez.
I'm 3 years old and I'm learning about Beowulf. We had it was sort of a young adults version that was edited by a dude named, I want to say his name was Salinger, and there was amazing woodcuts in there. And my brother used to read this to me, and I'd just be like, "Yeah, read that one again." Read that one again. So, these were the things that formed my worldview. Was Beowulf, a dog that sails the ocean, and the Snow Queen. So, um, so yeah, and I because I never had any strong convictions about a lot of things. I never had preconceived ideas about a lot of things. I just learned as I went along, and there were things that I thought, for years I thought this. Turns out, well, it's not right. So that immediately made me learn everything you think might not be right, and you should always, unless it doesn't matter, like who made this? Who cares?
Yeah.
You should always be looking for another version of something. Always looking for something that can be more proven rather than just, yeah, but that's what my grandfather said, so it's got to be the way it is.
Exactly. And I wish more people were like that.
Yeah, so do I. And then when they tell you that they're doing their version of that, but they still come up with the same thing, you got to worry.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did that. I went through the science, and I found, okay, but you still think the Earth is flat. Okay, well done, you.
Good luck with that, buddy.
Yeah, right. Like, tell you what, why don't you go prove it and just take a long walk? Because that way, if you're right, we don't have to worry about you again, and if you're wrong, well, you'll find out, and then you'll lie to yourself and say that you didn't.
I don't think when you use the word science, you mean the same thing most people do, but okay.
Yeah, there seems to be a bit of problem with your definition. What was it? Princess Bride. This word you keep using, I don't think it means what you think it means.
Do not believe it means what you think it means. Or something like that.
Inconceivable.
Oh, yeah, that's the one.
Wallace Shawn. He was great.
I like him in Young Sheldon, too.
Yes. We only recently started watching that. My wife got on it for some reason or other, and so we started watching it, and I was surprised at how good it was. And I loved Wallace Shawn, that he's in that, and his character in that is just like, wow. I mean, what a weird dude. And then it's funny to see Ed Begley Jr., who I never cared for, play a character that's so different than he's always played. I mean, he's so mean. And Sheldon will come in and be like, is this where we're doing a thing? He'll be like, no, now get out. Like, what the fuck is wrong with you? This is a little kid.
Yeah. An annoying little kid.
Yeah. An annoying little kid, but a little kid nonetheless. Yes, we actually enjoyed that, and we started watching the one that it's based on.
Big Bang.
Yeah, Big Bang Theory, and it's good. It's funny, but I'm not getting it the way everybody else does.
Let's see. We were huge fans of Big Bang Theory, and in fact, since they stopped making it, we're still sort of in mourning over it. And try to watch the reruns, and all I get is this wave of sadness. So I don't really even watch the reruns now.
Right, because there won't be any more.
Yeah, that one really kind of hit when they stopped making it because we liked it so much.
Yeah, that was one of those cult shows. I mean, there were a couple like that fairly recently that people really latched onto, and that 70s show was one. I know a lot of people that watched that like religiously, and when that went off, they were just kind of like, "Fine, it's time to just kill myself." Was that Third Rock from the Sun or something?
Yeah,
that was big and had a weird cult following to it.
That was a cool show at the beginning, and they kind of got less good, in my opinion,
less cool
as it went on.
Right. I never watched it. I recognized there was a girl that used to be on there. We saw her in a show that's a current show, and I actually recognized her.
She's in Mom.
Was it?
Mom?
No.
No, you don't watch Mom? Okay,
I mean,
she
I'm
was
not saying she's not in it. I'm saying I don't know it.
the one. You mean the blonde girl?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. She. I
Kristen
thought, yeah,
Johnston.
yeah. The only thing I knew her was she was on Mom recently, but I
Okay.
don't know what else she's
No,
done.
she had a very short role on a show called Our Flag Means Death,
Oh,
and
I heard of it.
it's like a comedy pirate thing done by the guys that did What We Do in the Shadows.
Oh, okay.
The two New Zealand guys are in charge of that, and it's basically making fun of everything about pirates, and it's not great, but it's kind of funny. And it's funny to every once in a while see like a guy that we haven't seen in a long time. Like that chick showed up, and I instantly recognized her because of her nose. She has a weird nose, and I was like, that girl used to be on a sitcom in the '90s, and my wife was just kind of like, okay, and I was like, I don't know what it was. I think it was Third Rock from the Sun, and I just remember people thought she was really hot at the time and stuff, and so she looked it up. Sure enough, that was her. Um, so it was funny that I recognized her because I didn't used to watch that show. But yeah, we I don't know. We didn't really watch a lot of shows. We watch more English stuff. I think I told you that before.
Yeah.
It's just our vibe.
Well, I think we probably should wrap this one up. This has gone
That's
on for quite a while. Whoa, an hour and a half. We've
about an hour and a half. Yeah. Yeah.
So, unless you got something else you'd like to get out there.
Nothing I can think of.
Okay, well, I'd just like to remind everybody Lifeblood 2, you can pick it up at lulu.com/spotlight/strange sound, or you can go to garyhillauthor.com and look at the Tales of Wonder and Dread pages, and you'll find it there. And why don't you give your websites and stuff?
Mine's easy. It's delmerritt.com. If you can read this little thing that says Delmerritt,
Right
just
there.
put a .com on that and you'll be good.
All right. Well, thanks for doing this again, and
Thanks for having me.
we got something from you coming up in the fall too, coming in one of the things. So we'll probably do another one then.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
All right. Sounds good, Del. Take it easy.
All right, Gary. You too.
Spooky Ventures is the home for spooky content and spooky merchandise on the web. Check it out today at spookyventures.com. And remember, always keep it spooky.